Hello and welcome. My name is Benita Dimely Ross, and I will be your host for this TLC session. We are excited that you have joined us today for Transforming Practice Through Design-Based Research. Please welcome Michael Kolodziej. Take it away.
Find the unmute button. We're going to pause briefly. All right, thanks everyone. Sorry about that. Hopefully that woke you up and got you invigorated to talk about transforming practice through design-based research. My name's Michael Kolodziej, and I'm the AVP of Learning Design and Innovation for Bridgepoint. I've had a lot of time back and forth at Ashford and Bridgepoint, and am excited to share a little thinking that I've done lately around sort of transforming our lens for how we view change, and particularly change in education. And I wanted to just start off with one of my favorite quotes. I share it often. If John Dewey, great American educational philosopher, of course, if we teach today's students as we taught yesterday's, we rob them of tomorrow. And I think implicit in that is a couple of ideas. One, that the world is changing continually, and obviously we see that in a number of ways, and also that we need to continue to evolve the way we teach and learn. And I believe wholeheartedly in both of those two ideas. And so, just for fun, I don't like to talk for 30 minutes straight, so I sort of want to mix it up a little bit. And I'm going to ask if you would just to take a minute and think about, and this will be a different amount of time for all of us. Of course, it just struck me that my 20-year college graduation is coming up next year. So this is 20 years ago for me. How has school changed? And if so, has it changed? And if so, how? And take a moment if you would, and think about this. Share it in the chat if you want. If not, that's fine. I'm gonna sort of make a suggestion, and hopefully you'll chime in and disagree with me if you see it differently. But I'm gonna say I think school has changed in some ways, and I've chosen two photos that maybe aren't completely fair, but they illustrate a difference, and I think that's about a 50-year difference. And some things are the same, and some things are different. And when you look at the way it has and hasn't changed, it certainly is interesting to make comparisons. Technology's taken over the classroom. Online's changed everything from when you were an undergraduate, says Jim, and online libraries are great. Online teaching, not so much, Rebecca says. Yeah, there's been some change, but could we agree maybe as a minimum that change has been slow to come to education? You look at the world around us in terms of, gosh, even just smartphones, right? In the last 15 years, I didn't have a smartphone when I was in college. Now I do. The amount of change in our lives as a result of that technology, incredible. Yet we go to school and it still looks a lot the same. I'm not going to get deep into this, but I just want to mention a couple reasons why I think it's pretty well known why things don't change. Enculturation of practices and beliefs. We do what we know. We do what we're comfortable with. We do what we're familiar with. There's often resistance to change. If you were in Jeff Borden's session this morning, he talked about that in terms of innovation. He says it's doubt, and then there's mockery, and expect it. And then there's transition costs. When you change what you do, it takes time, it takes money, it takes mental energy. And I think one of the major problems outside of those things, because we can't deal with those things today, but the one thing we can do is maybe think about change a little bit differently by suggesting that maybe there hasn't been a paradigm for making change in education. And maybe, just maybe, I can show you one of those today. So I'm going to first start off by just making a couple of controversial statements about experimental design, and I'm going to sort of blame it as the culprit in the lack of a paradigm for change. Experimental design is, of course, amazing, and it is also slow. This is probably the most fascinating thing, and hopefully you'll raise an eyebrow at this. It will not produce the data that you think it will. Sort of like the Star Wars. Those aren't the droids you're looking for. And it isn't the most appropriate method for all research, and particularly complex social science research in the study of human learning. We all know experimental design, right? You've got, and it comes out of hard science. It comes out of medicine, frankly. Patients, you have a control group, you have a treatment group, you follow up, you measure the difference after the control and treatment group are processed, and then you look and you see, you know, did we make any changes? Is there any significant difference between group A and group B? And this is incredibly valuable, and it is not a bad tool or a deficient tool in any way in hard science and in experimental research. In the social sciences, though, things are a little bit more tricky. And I wanted to just provide a quick example of how things can become tricky and how we can get the answer wrong sometimes. So 2016, we want to know there's this big hype about adaptive learning, and folks are interested, what is adaptive learning going to do for Ashford University? So they say, let's get a course, and let's figure out what the impact of adaptive learning is going to be on standard course metrics. And as one does, we do a quasi-experimental research design. We can't randomize the students truly in our sections. And of course, we have differences as it relates to instructors, but we can certainly have some sections with the adaptive learning tool and some without. And that's what we did. And so in order to make it clear what the impact was of the tool, what we did is we took the normal course format, 2 discussions, an assignment, a journal, and a quiz, and we got rid of the quiz, and we replaced that with an adaptive learning tool called Realize It. So we have now a control and a treatment group. The control group is the normal course as it's been running, and the treatment group is now has one thing changed. So instead of a quiz, you've got this quiz tool that you ask questions. It asks you questions, you answer them, and it sort of figures out what you know and don't know. So it's supposed to be more efficient than a quiz. So you'd expect, okay, this is probably going to help people, right? This is a good way to approach this question. Well, fast forward a couple of months later, and you'll see that what we found was that every conceivable metric was negative. From the standard course metrics to the end of course survey, to the qualitative comments that were in the end of course survey. And we had a problem, right? In this case, we arguably did harm. We made things worse, right? And the numbers don't lie. And in a traditional experimental design, right, this is pretty much considered a failure. But the question that we had was, and fortunately, smarter people than I have tackled these problems well before. And one of my favorite smart people is Seymour Papert. Seymour Papert is the father of constructionism, the learning theory, MIT Artificial Intelligence Lab, and Media Lab. He's a co-creator. He makes a point. He is an incredibly intelligent man, and he spoke very effectively with examples. And he said, you know, essentially, I'll let you read that, but he said, if I built an igloo in Boston in the summer, you probably wouldn't say that igloos had failed me or that igloos were a failed construct, right? You probably would assume that there was something more going on there. And this is the complexity of education. So in this example, Igloo could be adaptive learning. It could be online learning in general. It could be anything that you seek to test in this manner, this sort of treatment manner. The challenge is that if one believes that the context matters, and I'll give you an example, I think that proves that context does matter, then you will inherently have an incomplete understanding by using the experimental approach. And let me just qualify this by saying, if I put a tool into the course that I just showed you, and I had a negative 10% decrease in student metrics, That doesn't in any way mean that I walk down the street to the next course, course B, and course B will have a 10% decrease in metrics just because it happened in course A. These aren't test tubes with the same chemicals in them. They're classes with different people and different instructors and different variables taught in different ways with different announcements, with different approaches to instruction. And so we oftentimes will spend a lot of time trying to get this significant number, this statistically significant digit, related to adaptive learning. But then you go on down the road and you look at application of adaptive learning, and not everyone's getting that number. It's maybe a little hashtag mind blown. I'm gonna include an article from, gosh, it's all the way back from 2002 from the Journal of the Learning Sciences about design-based research that goes way more into the theoretical part. I'm going to take us out of the theoretical part, however, and into the practical in terms of what you can do. Seymour Papert also asked, does wood produce good houses? You know, if I built a house out of wood and it fell down, would that show that wood does not produce good houses? If I made a course that had adaptive learning in it and it was negative, all the metrics were negative, does that mean that adaptive learning is bad? No, it just means we didn't do it the right way. So this is the article that I'll share with you in the chat here at the end, design-based research putting a stake in the ground. It certainly is not the only article, but it's one that's pretty succinct and helpful in understanding this principle. So design-based research, this is gonna be one of those instances where someone explains something in words that you already understood. So design-based research is very simply taking the theory that you have that you know is already proven in the literature, taking the requirements for a particular design, coming up with what you think is a good design, implementing that design, analyzing the effects, and then going through an iterative process of redesign. And this is the basis for our innovation work that's overseen by the Innovation Steering Committee with representatives from Ashford and Bridgepoint. So for instance, let's take our understanding of constructivist, cognitivist, and social learning. Let's pair that with our undergraduate course that needs an adaptive learning tool and needs to improve learning. And of course, you'll get an outcome. After 2 to 3 iterations is typically when we get the best result. But along the process, you get a bunch of implications for theory. You get things that you discover in the process of redesigning, of using qualitative and quantitative data simultaneously to better understand what's happening in the actual classroom environment. So in our innovation agenda, we do things like look at drop rate, fail rate, and of course survey the quantitative data. And then we combine it with the qualitative data. And we merge this in what Creswell talks about convergent parallel mixed methods as a methodology. As we do this in design-based research, because you don't have a control in an experiment group, we really have a baseline and a post. So we start with iteration number 1, those are our metrics, iteration 2, and then iteration 3. The goal to change the metrics over time by continuing to reinvent, to analyze, and to reconstruct the learning environment. So, okay, that's great, Mike. You work in innovation, you have dashboards, you have access to things that I don't. This is all very heady and interesting, but what can I do? Well, you know, the classroom is dead without the instructor, right? It is simply a web page, and you have such an incredible opportunity to impact almost all of the parts that directly touch our students. Now, as I was sitting here thinking about this in preparation for today, a handful that I came up with. Announcements, right? What types of announcements work well? Why do students read some of my announcements and not all of my announcements? How can I get students to participate better in discussions? What if I did this? What if I tried that? You don't need a fancy dashboard in order to be able to count the number of responses that each student does in a week. I know that that would not be part of your paid expectation as a faculty member, and I'm certainly not suggesting that it would be. But if you have an interest in improving practice, Maybe you do some different types of personal outreach. Maybe it's an email to this student, maybe it's a phone call to another. Civitas is an incredible tool that allows us to work with students in different ways, that allows us also to capture metrics, right? Tutoring, how are students using the tutoring services that are in your class, or are they not? What about if you tried an announcement about tutoring versus an announcement every week about tutoring? You have a classroom, it is your playground. The thing about abandoning the research design, sort of experimental design mentality, is that you take the pressure off of, no one's asking you to publish a paper here. So, you're not in any way indicating that, what works in your classroom and in the context of your experience is going to translate broadly into the rest of the world. What you're saying is that in this context and under these conditions, when I did this, I found that. And I think that there's a tremendous amount of room to play. I'm just going to give you one example, and this is hilarious because this is from 2013. In 2013, I was teaching more than I teach currently, and I had this idea of badging. I was teaching 5103, and I really wanted to get students to notice when other students made responses in discussions that were sort of noteworthy or worthy of review and highlighting. And so I just went in and made 5 little, what I call badges. I would refer to them lovingly now as stickers, because they don't represent like a cumulative sort of skill set or anything. They're more or less just a, hey, good job. And so on my own, without any support from the university, I just went in and started playing with this. And just to give you an example, okay, here, so somebody wrote their original post, another person commented on it, and then I really liked that this person had used examples within the media, et cetera, et cetera. And then I get this, which is a letter from a student, an email, basically saying, oh my gosh, you gave me a badge, a sticker, a thing. I saw it in the first week and I didn't get one. And then all of a sudden I wanted one of these things. She was incredibly motivated by it, to the point where she gave me a great job teacher badge, which I thought was awesome. Now, had I waited for an official, grant or gosh, what are they called? I'm going to blank on them now, but the official grants that are awarded every year, or to get on the innovation agenda, which is limited, this sort of thing wouldn't happen. And so what I'm wondering is, are there areas of potential impact and interest for you all? Those are the ones that came up, top of my head. Where are the low-lying fruit in facilitation? Is it in feedback? Is it in the use of video to help students to understand concepts? Where is the low-lying fruit? And what have you already done? I'm sure that within the group today that there are a number of examples folks could share about tinkering, exploring, etc. For instance, what if we wanted to improve announcement effectiveness, right? You could try different tools. You could try to use images. You can have a hook title. I know instructors that have used memes before, and you could measure the amount of activity within the classroom. I don't know if you've had a chance to play with it, but Canvas has some pretty interesting measures of student activity that can be used to help determine what's working and what's not. Ultimately, I return back to the quote, if we teach today's students as we taught yesterday's, we rob them of tomorrow. And so my challenge to the group really is, how can we, within the bounds of your teaching practice, how can you measure, iterate, and evolve such that we don't rob our students of tomorrow, but in fact we better prepare them for tomorrow?